Hey everyone, CWD Music Reviews here. I'm CWD and this is going to be a music review of the new Blood Orange album, Freetown Sound. Blood Orange is the artistic pseudonym of singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, producer, Hynes. Can't say I've been that familiar with his work as Blood Orange or his work in general, so I decided maybe I'll give this album a try and see if he can win me over. He seems to have a interesting sound about him, or an interesting flair for experimental R&B of sorts. And while I do like this album, there's just a good chunk of tracks here that prevent me from absolutely being head over heels for it, or even remotely thinking it's great. This album's about 17 tracks in length, close to an hour long, if not an hour long. Though it doesn't feel like it's too long, it's definitely a good length, even if some of these tracks feel either redundant or just doesn't go much of anywhere whatsoever. The thing about this album instrumentally is it's a nice stew of funk, jazz, soul, neo-soul, some ambient, even some new wave here. I mean, you got the queen of new wave music, Debbie Harry, the front woman of Blondie on this album. She lends vocals to the track E.V.P, which is one of my favorite tracks on the album. There's some weird string on this intro, and it has all these funky-ish synth stuff going on. A lot of spacey and really lively type guitar and more synth that really lightens the track up. It's also the longest track here with a drum bridge in the track that I like a lot. There's some sax, and Dev is using a spoken word voice, I guess, about his confusion with sexuality, noting that all of these things are not going to go your way, she's not going to get you hard, and all this other stuff. It's pretty interesting and kind of postmodern stuff. But Debbie's not the only vocalist on this album here. There's quite a few female vocalists all over this album. I'm definitely won over by a good chunk of them, if not all of them. Empress of is on the track Best to You, which is one of my favorite tracks here. She sells the track particularly well. This lively, jungly or tropical house percussion going on. There's some driving marimba on this track. It kind of reminds me of like Lone before Lone went to shit. Galaxy Garden and before that Lone, not the uninspired Lone that we have now. You get some like spoken word poetry from Ashley Hayes on the opening track by herself. She seems really impassionate here. She's definitely selling the point that feminism is being a woman coming into your own as a human being whilst in a male-dominated environment. This track here works particularly well instrumentally, pretty much being this piano ballad with all these well-layered group vocals on this track. It kind of tugs at the heartstrings a little. You got Carly Rae Jepsen on Better Than Me, which is kind of like a nice, spacey, and in a sense driving a new wave R&B track. She's both singing in like this type of rhythm as well as having some spoken word about her. I gotta say the hook is pretty catchy. But I know she's better than me. Desiree has vocals on Love Ya. You got Kelsey Lou on Chance, and I think my favorite of all the vocalists on this album has to be Nelly Furtado on Hadron Collider. It's pretty much the most ballad-like track on the entire album, in an entire album where a good chunk of the time it's kind of slow, kind of easygoing, and pretty lower than mid-paced. There's some like DJ scratches on the track. She's definitely giving this track a lot of weight and a lot of emotion. I actually would have preferred that this be like a duet instead of just primarily a Nelly Furtado type track. And if there is one complaint I do have about this album as a whole, while Dev is contributing all of and a good chunk of the instrumentation and production, he is really playing second fiddle vocally on his own album. It's not to say that Dev is a bad singer. He's not. He's nasaled, but he's not. But all this reverb that gets thrown onto his voice and all this spacey atmosphere that's all over a good chunk of the tracks here, it makes it really difficult to zero in on what it is Dev is talking about. And that really hinders the overall concept to the album as a whole. Pretty much this album about displacement. It can be applied generally, but in this case specifically, it's about displacement as both a black person and a sexual deviant, or what society would deem as a sexual deviant. So black bisexuality from what I'm reading from the lyrics. And that's cool. There's definitely a lot of poetic tension to a good chunk of the tracks. Like the track Augustine, which has a driving drum pattern to it. Some like new wave-ish guitar going on. And there's like these undertones of synth and some additional vocals from, I believe, Ava Rain. And I think this track pretty much kicks off the displacement and the feeling of alienation because of being different off. Pretty much him pleading to St. Augustine for some kind of guidance or something of that nature. And from the research I did about St. Augustine as it related to sexual orientation as well as just sexual nature in general, he seemed to have preached that it's not so much the act as it is the intention. Was this rape or was this consensual? I don't know if it goes that deep, but it's definitely something that adds flair to the lyrics as a whole. Add to that, there's sampling on here that tries to make the concept have a lot more depths and layers than it actually has. So maybe there is more to this than meets the eye. You got the track Love Ya, really cool like vocal refrain going on here. And again, Zuri Marley has some really cool vocals here, pretty much contributing to the only lyricism here that isn't the refrain being done 3 times throughout the track. But the track just ends with this sample of a guy talking about how he feels discriminated for being a black person. And he's talking about how he needs to be self-conscious of what he wears. Is he gonna wear his hat sideways or just regular? Is he gonna wear his pants baggy or is he gonna pull them up? Is he gonna have friends walking with him? And if so, but it just cuts off from there, and I'm not sure what this sample adds to this track. The most random one I think is Thank You, which is kind of a track that obviously it's just appreciative of life and appreciative of being all praised for what it is you do in life. But then all of a sudden, again, at the tail end, you get like this really aggressive rap blip. An asteroid has more rights than my people. I'm like, holy shit. What did this have to do with the track? Although this sampling does kind of work with the track Hands Up, which has this nice catchy hook. Are you sleeping with the lights on, baby? Hands up, get up. Hands up, get up. And it pretty much glides into the sample of like all these protesters going hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot. But then this sample is then followed by another sample of Vince Staples talking about how the perfect thing doesn't need a replacement. But I'd have to look up the interview itself because the sample is just so brief, once again, that I just don't know what to make of this thing. I actually didn't even know that was Vince Staples until I had to look that up. That's just how brief and inconspicuous the sample is. And this pattern of either these samples not working or Dev just sounding so inconspicuous on his own album, this goes on for like half the album. But there are definitely highlights to this album, like By Ourselves, like Augustine. The track Chance, maybe because it's like one of the initial spacey, easygoing tracks that I like it, but also because of the duet between him and Kelsey Lou on like the tail end of the track. Tracks like that, Best to You, E.V.P, Hands Up, Hadron Collider, and Better Than Me, these are all cool tracks and they're definitely favorites of mine, but a majority of the time I'm either just not really sure what to make heads or tails of, or I just really don't care for these tracks at all. The track I Know, I think should have been the closing track to the album, as it like pretty much glides this spacey atmosphere that the album as a whole goes for out with like some really climactic and incredibly tension-grabbing builds that goes on with this track. The drumming here is pretty attention-grabbing. I certainly dig that about it. It's a really lush track. It makes me think, oh, is this the closing track? Nope. the track Better Numb is. It's an alright track, it's just like anticlimactic as hell though. It's pretty much this acoustic-ish cut. I say acoustic because it's like one of the only tracks here that has acoustic guitar going on, but there's just so much reverb here that once again it just feels like another track that's just outright spacey and all that nonsense. It just feels so underdeveloped, especially as it just has like lyrics from tracks before this album, and then it just like glides into just little snippet vignette things that sound like radio play changing, and I'm not sure what to make of that. So overall, this is a interesting album. It's certainly got quite a few ideas going for it instrumentally. I think the concept is fine. I think the concept is solid in its own, with the exception of But You, which has this corny ass hook. You are special in your own way. Okay, tell that to Hitler. But outside of that, I do like the concept. It's just kind of mired by half of the tracks on the album. There's not really a whole lot of bad lyricism here, if any, but there's just so much bassiness to what it is Dev is doing, and I guess there's a point to that in trying to reinforce the feeling of displacement and esotericness and idiosyncrasy, but as far as like quality goes, as far as like trying to get that message across, it really does hinder what it is Dev is trying to go for. Not that the instrumentals are bad, there's nothing like horrible about the album, but there's just too much in the way of this concept that makes me think, well, why do I need to pay attention to what it is he's saying when, number one, every female vocalist is out singing him, number two, there's samples that just feel way too out of place in the tracks themselves, and number three, there's just so much reverb to Dev's voice that it just seems like he might as well just be an instrument that has no language whatsoever. Don't get me wrong, I do like this album, it's just, I just don't really see myself returning to it except for just being in a chill mood. Or if my introverted ways makes me feel insignificant, I guess. I don't know. But if you are into like this alternative R&B sound, if you like funk, if you like your music with like jazz elements to it, then yeah, do definitely check this out. If you're a big new wave guy, then there's definitely something in it for you. Me personally, while I do enjoy this album, while I do think it's good, it's just not fantastic. This album is a plus 1.4, had a plus 3. Maybe if Dev shaved off a good chunk of the meat, I would be more into it, but as it is, within the 17 tracks, yeah, it's just not doing as much for me as I hoped it would. But if you give me this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? What was the reason for that, and which I consider listening to and reviewing next? CW Music Reviews here, signing off.